Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Modern Astrology Summit. I'm your host, Suzanne Gerber, and I hope you've been enjoying all the interviews so far. I am really excited about today's speaker, Divine Harmony. I had invited her to be a guest on last year's summit, but she decided she'd rather pack up her life and move across the country instead. So I've been waiting a whole year for this interview. I really resonate with Harmony's divinely feminine approach to astrology, which for the record in no way excludes men. Harmony actually began studying astrology at her first nodal return between 18 and 19. That was 26 years ago, she's proud to share. She has a master's degree in depth psychology with a focus on mythology and a Jungian perspective. She's also done intensive shadow work and furthered her own studies in mystery schools and psychic and channeling courses, all of which goes into informing how she views and practices and teaches astrology today. Oh, and I forgot to mention, she's also an initiated priestess who teaches online courses, she mentors, and she leads pilgrimages to Egypt. And she's writing a book. Somehow she has found the time to join us today to talk about the evolution of astrology. And for that, I'm really, truly grateful. So I am absolutely delighted to introduce you to Divine Harmony. Welcome to the summit, Harmony.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so glad the timing worked out.
I know. Thanks for reaching out again.
So you have a beautiful presentation for us, and let's waste no time on that. But first, just by way of explanation, you know what, we know there's a branch of astrology called evolutionary astrology. You're talking about something different. Why don't you just explain what you're talking about and lead right into your presentation?
Okay. Yeah, so I'm not talking about evolutionary astrology, the system. I'm talking about the process of evolution of astrology, all kinds of astrology. And in my talk, I'm going to explore what that means, how we can support that process. Interestingly, at my Saturn return 15 years ago, so I just had my Saturn opposition last year, for grad school, I did interviews and a whole paper on the evolution of astrology. And I interviewed some of the leading astrologers of that time, and they're still very much the leading astrologers today. One of them has passed on. And I will actually be weaving in some quotes from that paper, both from myself and from the astrologers. It was a full circle moment of looking at that paper and what I said and what I did, and then looking at where I am now at my half Saturn return. And I was like, wow, pretty much everything back then has just been leading me. And I kind of forgot about some of it until I reread the paper. So I want to talk about that process of evolution and how it applies to astrology. And that is what I want to share today.
Fabulous.
So I will open up my screen. There we go. So welcome to the evolution of astrology. And I'm just trying to move these things here. There we go. So I am big into etymology. It's one of the things that is exciting to me, looking at the hidden meaning behind words. I do this with the stars and the constellations. I do this with names. I do this with words. And so as I was preparing this PowerPoint, I was like, what is the etymology of the word evolution? And I thought to look it up. And so here are some of the ideas of what the hidden meaning or the deepest meaning of the word means. Of course, there's to unfold, open out, and expand, from the Latin evolvere, which means to unroll, roll out, roll forth, or unfold. Figuratively, it means to make clear and disclose, to produce and develop. It also means to turn and to revolve and to develop by natural processes to a higher state. So revolve makes me think of the planets and the solar system as it arcs through space, and our galaxy and our universe, and even our DNA that spirals. Just like the universe is unfolding and expanding and evolving, so are we as a humanity. And actually in science, stasis, meaning not moving at all, is the precursor to death. Nothing truly stays the same, but is always in a constant state of change until it stops moving. And then when it does that, it will die. So, this process for me, it's like I think about sometimes we take what we've studied and learned from the past and we build on it and we take it further. Sometimes we see what we thought or believed in the past and we realize in the light of the awareness of today that it's actually not true and we throw it out. And this is like the process of science. I mean, there's so much that you can apply to that. So either way, the past is like a reference point, but it's not somewhere to stay stuck. And the future is what we're evolving towards or moving towards. And everything is in a state of change and evolution. And just like everything else, astrology also evolves. I also thought to look at the etymology of astrology. And the modern meaning of this word literally is calculation and foretelling based on observation of heavenly bodies. But more anciently, it was the Latin and Greek words astrologia, which actually meant astronomy and the science of the heavenly bodies. And literally it means a telling of the stars, astron and logia. And, back in the day, astronomy and astrology were the same thing. And here's actually a quote about that. The special sense of astronomy applied to prediction of events was divided into natural astrology and judicial astrology. So natural was calculation and foretelling of natural phenomena like tides, eclipses, dates of church festivals. And the judicial astrology was the art of judging occult influences of stars and planets on human affairs. And later, in Latin and later Greek, astronomia tended to be more scientific than astrologia. In English, the differentiation between the two began in the late 1400s, and by the 17th century, astrology was limited to the sense of reading influences of the stars and their effects on human destiny. Once upon a time, these two were the same. They were two wings of the same bird. And I actually think we kind of need to bring them back together, and we'll talk about that. Carl Jung, who was the father or grandfather of depth psychology, was very interested in astrology and wrote about it extensively in his book Synchronicity. And he literally said, astrology is of a particular interest to the psychologist, since it contains a sort of psychological experience which we call projected. This means we find the psychological facts, as it were, projected onto the constellations. So this is an important piece to understand when we talk about the evolution of astrology, because the constellations and the planets and the myths of them reflect our psychological and spiritual consciousness. And as we as humans psychologically, spiritually, physically, intellectually evolve, our myths change and evolve to reflect that. And you can actually see that over the course of time if you study the history of mythology. So why talk about the evolution of astrology? I put this pretty picture of a life cycle of a star because it's evolving. I have interest in this topic since I did the interview, of the astrologers. I interviewed a bunch of astrologers: Eric Francis, Michael Luton, Jeff Jower, the late Jeff Jower, Rick Levine, Stephanie Azaria. Those are the ones I'm going to be quoting in my talk today, but there were a few others. And I was just so interested in how astrology could evolve. I had this belief that everything was constantly evolving and that astrology was part of that. And I'll be reading some quotes throughout the talk from my paper, and I'll tell you when it's my words or if it's somebody else I'm quoting. Here's a quote from me. I was particularly interested in professional astrologers' opinions of how astrology was evolving and needed to evolve in order to keep up with the ever-changing world. Much like technology, which is constantly being updated with new ideas and concepts, it is my opinion that astrology also needs to change and evolve in order to continue to be a cutting-edge tool for consciousness and growth. I was particularly interested in how astrology could evolve in a way that would support the highest expression of growth and consciousness for individuals and the planet. And for anybody interested, like in my chart, Pluto stationed direct the day I was born. And the tightest aspect I have in my chart is Pluto aspecting my midheaven. So I've been interested in the depths and transformation and evolution and all these Plutonian things since I came in. So these are just some ideas of how astrology can evolve. And by the way, this is not an exhaustive list, so I'm just sharing with you what I've been working with, and you can add to this list. And each of these we're going to break down and look at more deeply. So include more feminine archetypes, question modern myths and create new ones, embody astrology, balance outer work with inner work, especially professional astrologers, go beyond just the personal with astrology, and also move away from astrology as just prediction. Incorporate the living sky, which is actually the original astrology. And then I want to talk about the age of Aquarius and how we can each contribute to that and how the evolution of astrology is connected. First and foremost, I want to say astrology evolves by humans evolving. But as the Hermetic maxim states, as above, so below, humans also evolve by astrology evolving. It's like a both and kind of thing. It goes both ways. So I want to start with including feminine archetypes. As Suzanne said in my introduction, I'm very much a big fan of the divine feminine, of the goddess, of the great mother. And I've done a lot of teaching around the divine feminine and feminine archetypes. When you look at the basic planets, Sun through Pluto, and I know Pluto was demoted, but I still consider him a basic planet. 8 of them are masculine archetypes, male gods, and 2 are feminine, the moon and Venus. We need more feminine archetypes to balance things out. And yes, for women, but not just for women. It's for the feminine essence in all of us. So, for me, the asteroid goddesses, Ceres, the great mother, Juno, the wife, Pallas Athena, the daughter, and Vesta, the priestess, they're standard. Like I standardly add them into a chart. Also, Eris, the new archetype of the 21st century. She was just discovered in 2005. The activist and disruptor. And I also standardly add in Black Moon Lilith, the fierce dark feminine. When you add these up, 4 asteroid goddesses, Eris, Lilith, to the moon and Venus, you got 8, and 8 balances the 8 planets. And then you actually have a balanced masculine, feminine representation in the chart. And representation is important. If you don't see yourself represented in a story, your gender, your sexuality, your culture, your skin color, it doesn't feel good. It's like, what do I have to look at and go, oh, that's a model for me. And so it's important that we are inclusive in astrology. And that's actually something I'm going to be speaking to in other slides. There are, of course, a lot of other feminine archetypes like Sedna and Hygeia and Astrea. And, there's a lot more that we can work with. Sorry. So questioning modern myths and remembering ancient ones. So I have to tell you, as a kid, I was always the one asking questions. And I would sometimes annoy people. And other times I would be like, my teacher's favorite student, because they could see that I was thinking and asking things. I wasn't just like going, oh, well, you're telling me that, so, okay, must be true. Like I would actually digest and break things apart. And I do that today. And I actually just taught a whole year-long mystery school all about this. So if you look at most of the myths that we project, right, as Jung said, we project our psychological internal experience onto the constellations. Most of the myths of the constellations are largely about a masculine young hero who dominates, who controls, who wins, who also rapes, conquers, and destroys. And it is a mythos that we've been living with for a very long time. And I am going to explore just in brief some of them just to give you an example. So like Perseus, if you've heard of Perseus, etymologically, his name actually means destroyer. That's what his name means. And he's the one that cut off Medusa's head, who, by the way, the backstory to that is Medusa was raped by Poseidon in Athena's temple, and Athena got mad at Medusa and cursed her and turned her into a monster. Anyhow, Perseus cuts her head off, and he does so at Athena's direction. And then he also goes and slays Cetus. Cetus is more modernly seen as a monster, but actually anciently was a whale and was a symbol of the primordial great mother, likely connected to the Sumerian but Mesopotamian Tiamat or Namu. So we've got Perseus, cutting the head off of a woman who was raped by a god, and then we've got him slaying the ancient primordial mother. Orion, we know of Orion as the warrior, but did you know Orion used to be a she? It was a female warrior, and you can actually see it in the stars in the constellation. There's feminine suffixes to certain star names. One of the stars in the center of the belt literally means sapphire or pearls, and she's wearing a girdle with sapphire or pearls. And I'm guessing it's a kind of like maybe more of a woman thing to do, but I don't know. Her name was Al-Uzza or Al-Jawza in Arabic lore, and she was the great one, the central one, the most mighty, and she was part of a triple goddess with Manat and Alat, which were sometimes seen as the three stars in Orion's belt. They were the triple goddess. And she may actually have a connection to the more modern Artemis, the huntress. And the Orion Nebula that is located in her womb position, if you look at the constellation, you can see the Orion Nebula. It's literally placed by where her womb would be. And a nebula is where stars are born and new celestial life springs forth. And then even looking at the myths of the planets like Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, or Uranus, however you pronounce it, and what I call the karma of the father line. So if you know your myth, Uranus wouldn't allow his wife Gaia to birth his children. He repressed them, wouldn't allow her to bring them forth, which is an abuse of the feminine and also the children. Saturn comes along, castrates his father, and usurps his power. Well, then the karma of the father line goes down to him, and he eats his children after being told that one of them is going to usurp him. So then his son Jupiter continues the karma of the father line and overthrows Saturn and becomes king of the gods. All three of these male gods, these grandfather, father, son, cycle through domination and control, rebellion and revolution, being oppressed, and then becoming the oppressor. And it's been the mythos of humanity for thousands of years. Just look at the state of the planet and the wars and the battles between cultures and genders and religions. So I think it's important that we question myths and we understand the social and political viewpoints that informed them, because all myth is a product of consciousness at the time. And because consciousness changes, our myths change as they did thousands of years ago. Just a couple more I want to say. This one was actually blew me out of the water when I was studying Sagittarius. So Sag, I have a daughter who's a Sag, and I love Sag. Sag is seen as the archer centaur today, and there's like questions about what centaur. Some people say it was Crotus the satyr who invented archery because you see him with the bow, but satyrs have 2 legs, not 4, and the constellation definitely has 4 legs. Then they say maybe it's Pholus, the keeper of the sacred wine. He's a centaur, possibly, but you don't usually hear about him with, archery. But in ancient Babylonian myth, Sagittarius is associated with the centaur-like god Nergal, and he is depicted with 2 heads. One's human, one's a panther. He's got wings. He has a stinger of a scorpion positioned above his horse tail. And here's a quote about him. Portrayed in human myths and hymns as a god of war and pestilence, Nergal seems to represent the sun of noontime and of the summer solstice that brings destruction. High summer being the dead season in the Mesopotamian annual cycle, he is the god of scorched earth. Those words really struck me because I don't know if you've seen in the news, but they talk about the scorched earth tactics that Russia does in the war with Ukraine. And I was just like, whoa, like that's a very visceral symbol, scorched earth. And then knowing that it's like a war tactic was even more disturbing. One of the stars in Sagittarius is Terabellum. And they say it comes from tetrapluron, which would be a very huge name change. And by the way, whenever you hear a name that you etymologically look at and realize that it's very different than what they're saying it came from, you can ask a lot of questions. Something happened there. Terra means earth. Bellum means war. Earth war. The star can mean earth war, and it's in a constellation that's associated with a god who was often said to be a version of Mars, but strangely is associated with Sagittarius. And you can see him on the ceiling of Dendera. He is literally placed there as Nergal in the place where Sagittarius is. The last two I want to speak to, I guess three, are the divine family, Andromeda, Cepheus, and Cassiopeia. So Andromeda is the chained feminine, if you know her myth. She got chained to a rock naked by her parents, and they left her for Cetus to devour. And there's more to the story than that, but just summing it up briefly, we're told her name means to be mindful of her husband, because Perseus comes along and saves her after killing Medusa and Cetus. He comes and saves her. But actually her name etymologically means leader of men, to be mindful of men, like a mother minds her children. And she comes from a female line of leaders, the mother line. And her story changed a while back. Why? All these stories change. They change because of political and social consciousness. And, you know, a big part of actually our mystery school journey was working to unchain the feminine. And, you know, Andromeda was our vision for that. Last but not least, Cepheus and Cassiopeia are the father and mother of Andromeda. So she's the vain queen who said she and her daughter were more beautiful than the Nereids, or I forget how to pronounce it. And he was, you know, they both agreed to chain her and put her on a rock. But etymologically, these constellations are actually connected to Osiris and Isis, and even more anciently, Set and Neith, or Net. Set today is seen as very evil in Egyptian myth, but he actually wasn't a long time ago. He was actually a benevolent god. His story changed. And so they were the king and queen, but they were belittled in myth because they were from Ethiopia. They had darker skin. They had different beliefs and traditions. And the Greeks and Romans were taking over. And they needed to write a myth that humiliated this culture and presented themselves as better. And so previously they were the divine king and queen with their divine daughter, Andromeda. But now they have this, you know, vanity story and, you know, child abuse, kind of, I guess, putting her on a rock. Also, just from a perspective of the fact that, you know, Cassiopeia and Cepheus are up there by the circumpolar constellations, the ancient Egyptians considered the circumpolar constellations the immortal ones, the ones that never die. And to put such a kind of, you know, feels like reality TV drama story for these constellations that for them would have been incredibly venerated, incredibly powerful because of their position. Also, Cepheus has stars in it that are connected to the pole star that change. You know, the pole star changes every 27,000 years, rotates. And that would have made these parts of the heavens very important. And then we have these kind of interesting stories. Some people will say that these myths, the hero myth, the conquering myth, is about conquering and slaying the ego. But to me, that's like saying you have to conquer, slay, and dominate your 2-year-old melting down child. Like, that's an old style of parenting. Dominate, control, right? A 2-year-old child just needs to be held. just needs to be loved, just needs to know that they can move through their emotions and they'll still be loved. Dominating or controlling will cause them to react to that or submit, but either way, it will perpetuate the winner, loser, victim, tyrant paradigm. And so from a depth psychological perspective, you do not kill the ego. I know there's some spiritual traditions that will say that, but what we do is we integrate it. It is like a little piece of something so much vaster, but it doesn't know it. And it is literally like a little 2-year-old, and our higher self is the mother or the father that's just holding it and letting it know it's okay. And ego is an anchor. It actually helps us anchor and ground in the world, so we're not like floating off the planet. So myths of integration, instead of battling good and evil, right and wrong, will serve human consciousness. And just take a look, around at the planet. So I have a few quotes from some great mythologists. Merlin Stone is one of them. She talks about myth. Myth presents ideas that guide perception, conditioning us to think and even perceive in a particular way, especially when we're young and impressionable. They define good and bad, right and wrong, what is natural, what's unnatural among the people who hold the myths as meaningful. If our myths guide our perception and condition us, what do you think a mythos of conquering, destroying, winning, and killing does to the consciousness of humanity? Here's Joseph Campbell on myth. I love Joseph Campbell. It has always been the prime function of mythology and rite to supply the symbols that carry the human spirit forward. So take a look around. Do you see the human spirit being carried forward? We have wars all over the place. We're dumping toxins in our air and our water and our food. Children, who I believe to be our most sacred beings, are getting sick, getting cancer, being abused, being sex trafficked. I don't think that the myths we are living right now carry our human spirit forward. And I believe we need to question our myths and we need to change them. So I also think part of this is questioning the systems we've overlaid onto astrology. And I do want to have a little caveat at the beginning of this slide. I don't think that we should throw anything out that we're doing now. This is about asking what was before, what's behind it, understanding. And then you'll find later, I'll talk about how they can all actually work together in interesting ways. So questioning the systems currently used in astrology, for example, why was Aries, 0 Aries, fixed as the start of the zodiac in the beginning of spring in the Northern Hemisphere, obviously? The sign that leads or is first used to change with the shifting of the ages. So as we moved into the age of Pisces, Pisces would be first. And as we moved into the age of Aquarius, Aquarius would be first. Every sign had its turn leading. In the age of Aries, or just at the end of Aries, start of Pisces, we fixed the first sign as Aries. And then if you look at the chart, if you were to put Aries on the ascendant, that puts Capricorn on the midheaven. And we essentially have the signs that are connected to the malefics ruling the most visible angles in the chart forever. So I do think we need to, by the way, reclaim the original energy of Aries, because, the original energy of Aries was protector and defender of the innocent, and not a slaughterer and warmonger as he is described in the more modern myths. And if you look into his more ancient history, there are threads of an older version of Aries that's there, Aries Mars. I also think we need to question the 12 sign system. So we have overlaid systems to make sense of things, which makes sense. But I would also say, I think that we did it to control chaos. If you look at the living sky, none of the constellations are precisely 30 degrees and 30 days for the sun to move through. Some are 8 or 9 days, like Scorpio, actually, and that's before the Libra scales got lopped off of Scorpio, because the Libra scales used to be Scorpio's claws. Some constellations are huge, like Virgo is like 46 or 47 days for the sun to move through Virgo. None of them are precisely 30 degrees. The moment we systemize something, it helps us to be able to rely on it, but it can also block its ability to evolve or change or grow. And we fixed systems and we fixed Aries as first. Unless our systems grow and evolve along with the times, we can be frozen in time. So we essentially almost froze ourselves in the age of Aries by fixing Aries. And we have frozen ourselves by fixing the tropical zodiac to the seasons versus allowing it to move with the stars. And I know there's a big argument in tropical versus sidereal, and they love to say, we're more accurate because we're connected to the stars, but actually both are overlaid, equally divided systems. Neither of them is precisely aligned with the movement of the stars. Now, I'm not saying we should throw systems out. I'm simply saying we want to be willing to see the value in other ways of looking at things and understand why we did that and what's behind it, because that is important in understanding the point of the system. The way I like to work with it actually is I look at tropical Western as like solar. It is very solar based. It's about the seasons, which are based on the sun's movement around the earth. And it's a very kind of yang, about the conscious self and the will, whereas sidereal is very lunar, especially they're into the nakshatras. And it's more yin and connected to like the soul and the feminine. And then there's the living sky. And I think that is connected to spirit. And it can actually, an awareness of the living sky brought in to understanding along with these other systems can actually help to bring the yin and the yang together. So I think they each have something to teach us, and they actually can work together very well. Here's a quote by Bill Plotkin, who's an amazing mythologist. "The problem, in short, is not an absence of mature myths and archetypes. They are plentiful and readily accessible, but rather the absence or at least rarity of a genuinely mature lens, a truly adult or elder lens, which would enable us to understand and recognize mature myths and archetypes. More generally, such a lens is needed in order to support full spectrum human development and to thereby gradually grow truly mature cultures." So when he says mature myths, I believe he means ancient myths, older ones. And there's another quote I'm going to share from him on another slide that kind of connects to this. I did read somewhere in the last couple of months or something, I think it was on Facebook, there was an argument that we didn't need new myths. And anyone who's saying this hasn't developed the myths and worked with the myths that already exist. And I have to say, I disagree, because for me, this is sort of like saying, oh, our environment is being destroyed by, all these businesses, but let's just keep them, and let's keep oil and coal and all these things that are destroying the planet, and we'll just find a more evolved way to work with them. When actually sometimes a higher, more evolved choice is to say no to them any longer and find better technologies that are clean, that don't have repercussions, that don't have, oh, if this earthquake hits, everybody within a 500, mile portal, it can get really sick, or, look at what happened in Fukushima. There's actually a poem, and I meant to look it up. I have it on my computer. I'm not going to remember who it is, but you might recognize it. There's a poem about a woman, and she's walking down a road and she falls into a hole. Do you know this poem? No. It's a great poem. Gosh, I meant to get her name so you can look it up. But I think if you just Google poem of woman walking down a road and falling into a hole, it should come up. Anyhow, in this poem, I didn't want to read the whole poem. It's a little long. She keeps doing this over and over, but each time she gains more awareness about what's happening. She starts falling in the hole, blaming everyone else. Then she falls in the hole and finally takes responsibility. And at a certain point, she walks down the path, sees the hole, and walks around it. But the poem ends with her walking down another road. Like she doesn't even go where the hole is anymore. She learned enough. I feel like as a humanity, we keep walking down the same road, falling in the same hole over and over again. And I think myths are a big part of what needs to shift that. If myths influence our perception and consciousness, as Merlin Stone said, what kind of mythos do we need to move beyond duality, beyond beliefs of black and white and good and evil and winner and loser? We need myths of union, of integration, of collaboration. Conquering and killing other people or a dragon or a monster or the ego still perpetuates the war consciousness myth. And it's not just killing the human spirit, it's also destroying the planet. If you just take a look around, and not to be a Debbie Downer, but it could lead to the extinction of humanity. So we need a new mythology. Charles Eisenstein is a spiritual teacher, and he talks about needing new and ancient myths. And for me, the ancient part is remembering what was there before. And the new part is creating modern myths that meet the needs of today, that tell a story of healing, of wholeness, and integration. And no, this is not about sugarcoating myths. It's about realizing that the stories we tell anchor into our subconscious and become the myths that lead human consciousness. So what kind of myth do you think we need to tell for humanity to awaken? Here's the other quote from Bill Plotkin that I was referencing. He literally is commenting on Charles Eisenstein's work. He says, Charles Eisenstein writes that we need guidance from post-hero storylines. Yes, or maybe better, pre-hero storylines or non-hero storylines, by which I mean the sort that we might find in pre- or non-dominator societies, in older partnership tradition, which are the same sort we can find embedded in the depths of our own contemporary human psyches. Again, the central question, what enables us to recognize non-hero storylines? We do need to include other cultural and spiritual myths. So as I mentioned, pretty much everything in astrology, especially basic astrology, it's Greek and Roman, Greek and Roman myths and gods. So including other cultures, Hawaiian, Egyptian, Mayan, African, Sumerian, Babylonian, and more. I also think the myths of cultures from the Southern Hemisphere is really important, because most of what we read today is Northern Hemisphere based, and I'll have students that live down in the South, Southern Hemisphere, and they'll be like, well, that's not how it looks down here, and they'll have other indigenous cultures. It's true. I actually have this desire to live somewhere in the Southern Hemisphere for at least a full year, because I want to experience the seasons. I want to experience all the constellations, the movement of the sun through the signs from that perspective. I just want to have a lived experience of it. And so it's such a strong desire. It's going to have to happen, because I've said it probably 25 times as I teach. Inclusivity means bringing in myths that are not exclusively from dominator cultures. But dominator meaning, history is written by the ones who won, right? So it's like all the other perspectives don't usually get included in the history, because that's not who's writing the history. And then I like to talk about there's history, and then there's her story. And then we bring in the feminine, Here's a quote from my paper. If the purpose is to assist people in self-realizing and raising their awareness and consciousness and opening them up to the interconnectedness of all of existence, then it's easy to see that the future of astrology needs to encompass all walks of life, all ways of being, and all points of view in order to be able to be a tool that's useful for all people. Astrology is something that all people can connect to on some level if it's made accessible to the way they view and perceive the world. I think the key to the evolution of astrology is to find a way that is inclusive rather than exclusive. So part of this is being open to new discoveries. Chiron was discovered in 77. He's a wounded healer. I think a lot of people use him now, but I know not everybody does. Sedna was discovered in 2003, the goddess of the sea and the mother of the deep. She actually has connection to Cetus, like in their myth has a similar kind of essence, and even can be connected to Tiamat and Namu, the Mesopotamian ancient mother goddess. Sedna, there's a resonance there. Eris was discovered in 2005. She's an activist and warrior goddess. I know she's called the goddess of discord and chaos, but I call her a revealer of discord and chaos because I feel like that's what she does. She doesn't come in and just go, I'm just going to screw everything up. She pulls back the veil and goes, look at all the crap you're not looking at, and yeah, that's disruptive and chaotic, but it was already there. She just revealed it. Hygeia was discovered in actually 1849. She was thought to be an asteroid. She's actually a dwarf planet, but she's the goddess of health and healing. Even Ophiuchus, the 13th sign. I know that this gets, every few years, a big argument comes because science people write an article saying astrology is debunked. And then, of course, astrologers fight back, and it becomes this, battle. And actually, I think Ophiuchus is a very important archetype. And I one day spent like hours on Stellarium. And then I even emailed the Stellarium people because I was like, am I seeing something that's accurate? And they validated that I was seeing something accurate. If you go back to like 3500 BC and then slowly progress, let's say every 500 years or every couple hundred years, whatever, on the same day, you actually see Ophiuchus, the constellation, descend over the ecliptic. And its foot starts to cross into the ecliptic, the path of the sun. So about 5,000 years ago, Ophiuchus stepped in to the path of the sun. Before that, it was just above. And that is important. And also what Ophiuchus represents. Ophiuchus is the serpent bearer. The serpent is wisdom. It's poison, but also medicine. It represents the mysteries and the occult. It's a goddess symbol, by the way, and there's things in the Ophiuchus constellation that make it likely that it was a she serpent bearer before it was a he. And so, there's other things you can include here. Black sun is very important. It's the empty focal point in the ellipse of the Earth around the sun. So it's like the solar version of Black Moon Lilith. And it's the void, the primordial abyss, the unlimited source of life. Some of these are very far at the edge of our solar system and are taking us beyond even what we know here. And they are super important in that respect. They're like gateway or threshold guardians, if you will. Embodying astrology for me has been big. So first, etymology. Embody means to invest with an animate form, to express, to arrange, or exemplify intelligently or perceptively. M can be to put into or bring into a certain state, and body, of course, is our physical vehicle. If you recall, astrology meant the speaking and telling of the stars, which is now my new favorite, description of astrology. Embodying astrology is to take the voice of the stars and bring it into our being, to bring heaven to earth. So I saw very early on in my studies of astrology, how astrology would keep me looking down at a chart or at a computer and up at the sky, and it would be a very heady process. I would be in my head thinking about what does this mean, and tracking the dates and the transits and looking up meanings and trying to understand things. And I learned early on in my studies that it actually was kind of making me go up and out, or it was keeping me overly focused on the future or stuck looking at the past. And as someone with a lot of Neptune and Pisces, I need to be in my body and I need to be present. I can't be like floating. It's very easy for me to float. And so also just the fact that astrology is often used as a means to look at and predict the future and understand the past, but understanding that our only true point of power is this now moment and what we choose to think, to feel, how we choose to act. So embodiment is actually a process of being here now, as Ram Dass said. And instead of looking up and out, we bring the heavens down and in. And I've taught a whole course on this. I want to give a couple examples of, because it can sound very, whatever. I just want to give you some examples. So the sun, in my understanding of embodied astrology, is connected to the solar plexus. And literally it's called the solar plexus. Haha. So, and the sun, you can visualize the sun at your solar plexus radiating, shining. Literally that visualization can actually be really good for your digestion, and for, all the processes of the organs in this area. The solar plexus is connected to your third chakra, which has to do with personal power. Someone with a healthy, integrated sun and like Leo energy or fifth house energy is able to shine brightly, but they also can let other people shine. And their authentic expression of themselves will actually inspire other people to shine brightly. And so you can work with the sun in this part of your body. You can literally go out and pull your shirt up and let the sun hit your solar plexus. You can do things like working with the color yellow, like lemon essential oil or yellow fruits and vegetables. It sounds woo-woo, but it's actually not. Also, the moon in my version of embodied astrology is located at third eye, your brow, like Shiva. The god Shiva always has a moon in his brow. This is the psychic center of intuition and clairvoyance, which means clear seeing. And there's a reason the Celtic priestesses of the past would tattoo crescent moons, boom, right there, their third eye. And the moon, of course, is a symbol of receptivity, right? It's actually receiving the light of the sun. And what is intuition if it's not us receiving information from other senses and receiving inspiration from the divine? And so you can work with the moon at your third eye. You can go out, eye gaze with the moon, bring the moon's light into your third eye. Again, I know this stuff sounds woo-woo, but I would like you to try it first because it's actually really powerful. And part of it is learning to feel the planets and signs in your body so that they're not some projected thing out there that you're not actually connected to, but that you feel it inside you. Because truly the universe is inside of us, but we walk around not even realizing it. And so there's things we can do with astrology to bring it down and in. I also personally have found that this has made me a better astrologer because I'm not just going into my head to understand something. I'm going into my body to feel it. I'm paying attention to my intuition. The body is earth, intuition is water, and those are the two feminine elements. And when you're incorporating both of them into astrology, you're actually honoring the feminine and bringing the feminine and the masculine into balance. And astrologers doing equal parts inner work and outer work. I think it is imperative that we as astrologers do our own inner work, shadow work, healing, whatever it is, however it shows up for you, so that we don't project our own disowned stuff. We can literally only lead others as far as we've gotten, right? And our own blind spots will lead us to have blind spots when we're reading someone's chart or working with a client. So the role of an astrologer, I believe, is to meet the client where they are, no matter how different that might be from where we are. That means no bias. That means not blocked by our own beliefs and judgments, which has been really interesting the last few years because everything's gotten escalated in terms of battle of belief, politically, in terms of science and health and everything. It's been a big thing. Eric Francis, in my interview, said that he believed that psychologists need to educate astrologers about process. And this was 15 years ago. So obviously a lot has been done in regards to this. But as anyone who's studied psychology or gotten a degree in psychology knows, you cannot succeed in psychology if you only study it, but you don't immerse yourself in it. Half of the psychological education, if not more, is working on yourself in the therapeutic process. And then going beyond the personal with astrology. A lot of astrology is used for personal reasons. Who am I? What should I do? What's going to happen to me? How does this apply to me? And those are all valid questions. Astrology is actually an amazing tool for self-understanding. But astrology has actually a lot more to offer beyond that. It can apply to social, political, transpersonal, spiritual, and even universal realms of awareness. And I put here, this also applies to looking beyond our own Earth and solar system. We're not the only intelligent life out there. Depth psychologist James Hillman said that psychology was often utilized in too limited a scope, focusing on the self in a self-absorbed, narcissistic way. His words. I think this applies to astrology, as it's very easy to get obsessive about looking at our own stuff, but then never extend our understanding of ourselves out into the world at large. And here's a quote from my paper. Astrology is a powerful tool for self-understanding, but if it's only used to understand one's own self and perhaps one's family and friends, it's being severely limited as a tool of awareness. Astrology can powerfully facilitate social consciousness as well as it does personal consciousness. And then, the thing about our own solar system, it's like the geocentric chart is Earth-based, right? It's like we're on Earth and we're looking up. But what happens if we go to the sun, or if we go to Pluto, or if we go to another universe? And obviously, unless we're an astronaut, and it's not happening to Pluto yet, but, and we won't be going to the sun unless we want to die. But it's like metaphorically, archetypically, imaginatively, this idea of looking at things from another perspective, not just our sun, our solar system, I think is important. And these new bodies and these galactic points being discovered are a big part of that. Moving beyond prediction and black and white thinking. So I have some really good quotes from Jeff Jower on this. Prediction is typically based on fear and desire. I'm afraid something will happen, or I really, really, really want something to happen. Most modern day advertising is actually based on speaking to these same unconscious desires and fears. The modern day advertising marketing was actually created by Freud's nephew, and he took the principles of the unconscious that his uncle created, and he applied them to marketing and advertising. And it's all meant to hook you in your desires and fears and get you to go, oh, I need that to be happy, or, oh, I don't want that to happen to me, so I must buy that. And a prediction can have that kind of energy behind it. So for me, astrology is about choice, not fate. And it's about expanding consciousness and awareness. The use of astrology is a means to have some sense of control over chaos. What if the point is actually to move through chaos consciously? Because I've seen students, clients, friends who are into astrology, and it's like, I don't want that to happen. And then something happens, and it's like, you can't necessarily run away from anything happening, but how you show up for it, you have complete control over. And Jeff Jower had some really good things to say. So this is me, and then I'll say when I'm quoting him. Fatalistic prediction can be highly disempowering. It often makes clients think they need their astrologer to tell them what to do. And so for me, when I'm doing readings, which I'm not doing right now, but anyhow, when I see transits incoming, I talk about the light and the shadow and the potential inherent in it. I talk about the spectrum and the individual's choice in meeting it and learning from it and moving through it. And this, I think, is important. I had a reading in my early 20s by an astrologer who was very well known at the time, and I'm not going to say who, and it's nobody I've mentioned so far in this talk. And I was in a relationship, it was actually at my Saturn return. I was in a relationship with someone who was a really good person and wanted to provide and wanted to be a great father and a great everything, and did very well in life, and everybody loved him. And it wasn't the right relationship for me. And I knew it. And I did an astrology reading, and the astrologer literally told me I should stay with him. He was the right one for me. I was thinking about going to grad school. He's like, I don't see grad school, I see babies. And I was just like, whoa. I went away from that reading, and I remember I took a good couple more months before I finally broke up with this person because I was questioning myself. I was questioning my own wisdom. I realized later that I think that person projected onto me. I think maybe they had an experience where someone they loved went off to go to school or went off to do their dreams and left them, or something triggered, something happened that made it so they couldn't see me clearly or my chart without their stuff. And I ended up going to grad school. And I will say I was in the doctorate program, and I ended up only finishing my master's because I did get pregnant, but not till 2 years later. And it was with someone else. And so going to grad school was pivotal. It's actually where I took astrology and did something with it. It launched me into my astrology career, and it was very important for me to leave that relationship. So, the prediction thing, if we're telling people what to do, we're taking away their power of choice, their being able to learn how to find their own inner voice and wisdom. And so here's the quotes from Jeff Jower. They're a little long, not crazy long, but I think they're worthwhile. So here's from my paper. Jeff Jower believes that it is humanity that needs to evolve. He thinks that astrology is not evolving anywhere interesting right now. This was 2008, by the way. He said that there are two main trends in Western astrology in the last 20 years, the rising interest in Vedic astrology, which is very much about prediction, and the rebirth of scholarship in astrology, as well as the rediscovery of its past, such as Project Hindsight. He said these trends were healthy, but at the same time, they created regression to the notion of predictive astrology of the past. He believes that seeking to predict events as predetermined seems to ignore the development of humanistic astrology and humanity's relationship to astrology. He would prefer to see astrology, quote, used as a tool of creativity, with its language and symbolism applied as a dynamic force to live in the present and create the future with human imagination, as opposed to instruments for describing a predetermined future. Jeff Jower went into great detail in regards to what research could help the evolution of astrology, and I found it very insightful. He said, we need to disconnect astrology from the natal chart and explore the meaning of the signs and planets as archetypes. We need to connect and or reconnect with archetypal energy as instruments of expression, freed from the limits of individual personality. We need to become living models of the divine expression of human energy and return astrology to something richer and more meaningful than prediction. Prediction is about control, but we should really be interested in models of discovery, a means of people connecting with archetypal energy in pure ways. We need to act as models, examples, and teachers of expressions of human experience in a more divine and inspired form. It is as if we were actors who were learning to play roles beyond personal limitations for the purpose of inspiring and instructing humanity, rather than being limited to functioning within the current limits of culture. There is a thin line between description and prediction. We need to describe where we stand in the river of time rather than stop the river of time. Predicting events is like a good magic act. It demonstrates power, but not wisdom. It also does not reveal meaning or encourage choices. A perfectly accurate astrologer does not empower people or teach anything. Powerful quotes. I know it might trigger some people, but and also in light of the fact that he's passed on, I really enjoyed rereading his words and remembering my time with him. So thank you, Jeff, wherever you are. So incorporating the living sky. This is a way to help astrology evolve. So go outside and look up. The living sky is not a system. It's a living matrix. It is wild, it is chaotic, and it is constantly changing, versus both sidereal and tropical that are systems that have a level and layer of being fixed. Work with the fixed stars, and I don't just mean look at them in your chart. I mean, go look at them in the sky, track their rising and setting and culmination. Get on Stellarium and put in your birthday, birth time, and location, and look at the living sky at the moment you were born. That's actually fascinating. Work with the galactic points, the galactic center, which is the center of our Milky Way galaxy, the super galactic center, which is the center of many galaxies, the great attractor, which is this anomaly that we're rapidly moving towards, people can't even wrap their heads around what it is, but it's pulling us, it's attracting us. And then Shapely 8, which is the largest one we know of now. The way that I've played with these is I've seen the galactic center as the great mother of our universe, our galaxy, our Milky Way galaxy. The super galactic center is like the grandmother, and the great attractor is the great grandmother, and then Shapely 8 is the great great grandmother. And of course, there are things beyond, but we haven't discovered it. Work with the synodic cycles. Gary Caton's really good with this, working with like Venus and Mercury and Mars and in their greater cycles, not just the one where they're moving through all the signs. And then, look beyond and see the greater arcs of time unfolding, like the epochs, the ages, the aeons. That, can really blow your mind. You want to make sure you're grounded, or you can totally float off the planet when you start studying that. Which brings me to the Age of Aquarius. So you guys are all going to get my Age of Aquarius free webinar. I don't want to say too much about it because there's tons in there, but it's essentially about the turning of the ages, and consciousness goes through cycles, just like our planet experiences night and day, winter and summer. The ages have night and day, winter and summer. And the Age of Aquarius is like the dawning. That's why it's called the dawning of the Age of Aquarius. And the time is now. I talk about why in my webinar. I'll just say 3 lines about it. There are many ideas of when this age begins, but the ancient way of calculating ages was to see what constellation was rising before the sun on the spring equinox. If you go out and look at the living sky since the 1500s, Aquarius has been rising before the sun. A really good article is by Bernadette Brady. It's called Riding the Fiery Boat of the Sun. And she talks all about why we are in the Age of Aquarius from the ancient way of calculating it. So, the Age of Aquarius in astrology also needs to evolve. So I have this slide, and you tell me what you think. I was going to talk about your greatest contribution to the Age of Aquarius based on where Aquarius falls in the house. And I'm also happy to just put this in a document so people can download it when they watch the video because of the interest of time. Do you think I have time to share it?
Well, you tell me, Harmony. You're the one who's really watching the vlog here.
Yeah, let's do it. Are you okay?
I'm fine.
Okay, so the Age of Aquarius, we're all here for it. And there's many ways you can look at what your contribution can be. And you can look at Aquarius planets and Uranus aspects and 11th house. But what I want to just focus on here, because it'll be more applicable to everybody, even if you don't really know your chart, is by the house that Aquarius falls in. And I particularly like to pay attention to the esoteric explanation of the houses, because this is about aeons and ages. This isn't just about me personally, but it is also about my interaction with the collective consciousness. So I'm going to go through the signs, starting with Aries, ending with Pisces, and just give you some things to feel into and tune into about where your greatest contribution to the Age of Aquarius can come forward. So for Aries, it's in the 11th house, which is the Aquarius house. It's the house of soul community, spirit groups, service to humanity. It's the house of hopes and dreams and visions. And you can help bring a paradigm shift in community and collective care. For Taurus, it's in the 10th house of spiritual purpose, life path, calling, mission. You can bring a paradigm shift in your life purpose and calling and truly bring forward work that serves the new age. Gemini, it's in your 9th house of higher mind and truth and teaching and sharing of wisdom, as well as opening your mind and receiving more of it. You can bring forward a paradigm shift in teaching and in opening to greater wisdom, as well as find teachers that blow your mind open. Cancer, it's in your 8th house. This is the house of spiritual transformation, transmutation, death, and rebirth. It's the house of facing fears and desires and moving through the eye of the Scorpio needle. It's a Scorpio house, naturally. There can be a paradigm shift you help bring forward in terms of how we deal with death and how we move through loss, but also deeper intimacy and relationship transformation. For Leo, it's in the 7th house, which is soulmates and partnership, and also union of masculine and feminine within. And you can really contribute to the transformation and evolution of relationship, a paradigm shift in partnership. I actually wrote an article about that like 15 years ago. It's called The New Paradigm of Partnership. It's on my website. It was like a download. For Virgo, it's in your 6th house, which is actually the Virgo house. It's the house of being of service, of physical and spiritual health, mind-body connection, also connection to animals. It's interesting that Virgo literally is the sign of holistic health. And then Aquarius is in your Virgo house. And so you can contribute to a paradigm shift in health and new healing modalities and mind-body connection. For Libra, it's in your 5th house, and esoterically, this is the house of spiritual will and higher self actualization. It's the house of living from the truth of your heart. And so this is about stepping out of the shadow of Libra, which is looking at other people or what do they need from me. And this is about radically coming from you, your truth, your higher self, and meeting the world from there. A paradigm shift in healthy ego, healthy sense of self, and how that shows up in relationship. For Scorpio, it's in the 4th house, which is the foundations of the soul, source, the bedrock of the chart. It literally can relate to past lives, family ancestry, DNA inheritance, memory of what you carry forward with you from previous lifetimes. You can help contribute to a radical paradigm shift in family dynamics, home and belonging. Also, perhaps remembering we are all not just from this planet. Sagittarius is in the 3rd house of mind energy, mental telepathy, spirit brothers and sisters. For me, one of the first thing that jumped out for Sag is bringing in radical paradigm change in the education of children, which I think is really needed. But also in our minds and how we understand our thoughts and how they inform and help to co-create reality. For Capricorn, it's in the 2nd house of spiritual resources, of self-worth and self-love, of life force, of values. And this can be about you contributing to radical paradigm change in finances and how we relate to material reality, learning to relate to money with more detachment, and in doing so, freeing money to be something greater than it is. For Aquarius, of course, this is your sign, and it's in your 1st house, and it's your soul's purpose, your auric field, how you express in the world, and you are pretty much made for this time. You can help lead the way, and you vibrate the Aquarius energies already like a tuning fork for others to attune to. So just be the rebel, be the revolutionary, be the great awakener, be different, be outside of the box, because we need you to be. And last but not least, Pisces, it's in your 12th house, which is the Pisces house. Selflessness, surrender. It's a deeply psychic, intuitive house, merging back into the primordial waters of origin. The 12th house is actually the house of gestation, when you were in the womb of your mother. And so it's like going back to the womb of the great mother, though. So this can be profound, opening up psychically, mystically, intuitively, even more than you already have, because you are Pisces after all. And remembering the spiritual gifts you carry for this age that are already within you. You just have to remember that you carry them. And finding freedom in spirit that cannot be found only in the body, and then bringing that down and in, bringing heaven to earth, and supporting the paradigm shift in spirituality. So those are just some things to feel into and see what resonates. And of course, you can watch the whole 2-hour webinar, and there's like a guided meditation at the end. So, to summarize, the future of astrology, we're the ones we're waiting for. We each contribute to the evolution of astrology. As Eric Francis said, we have to make the future of astrology. As Michael Luton said, the future of astrology needs people interested in its future. With open hearts and open minds, we help to co-create not just the future of astrology, but the future of humanity. So I think we should move beyond duality and polarization and find bridges between tropical and sidereal, between Democrat and Republican, between masculine and feminine, and between heaven and earth. So thank you for coming and listening. And this is actually my new logo that I just launched a new website last year, but this is the Hygeia logo, which I didn't even know when it came to me as a vision. I just saw like a chalice with a white serpent and the star on her head is Sirius. And anyhow, then I realized later, I was like, oh, it's Hygeia. So
Lovely.
let me take this away.
You know, Harmony, before we get too
Yes.
far away from what you just showed, I love the poetry, well, of everything. But the chart that you just showed about the Aquarian age and the houses, I'm sure there are people out there wondering, were you referring to the solar chart?
Oh,
Like if people know their ascendant, should they think about that? Maybe you could show the slide again.
yeah. I meant to say that in the beginning. Here, where is it? I recommend you pay attention to both your rising sign and your solar chart. So I'm a Cancer, so I would look at Cancer, but I'm Pisces rising, so I look at Pisces. And if you know your chart in detail and you've got like a really wide houses, you know, maybe you've got something else going on that doesn't, you know, maybe your Aquarius falls in 2 houses in your actual ascendant chart, and you can pay
Or
attention.
it's intercepted.
Yes, or intercepted, yeah. So thanks for that. I meant to say that.
I thought you might, and you know, I'm here to speak for the audience because they're probably sitting there wondering, and you know, I didn't want to talk over you, as you know.
Oh, right.
That was just wonderful. And I know you gotta leave us, and you could stop sharing. Thank you. Just one thing, I mean, there's so many things I would have loved to add, and it would be a fabulous conversation to have another time, but you know, there might be people thinking, well, gosh, it's so hard to fight, you know, the system, right? The myths are what they are. They keep getting reinforced. When you and I first were chatting, you were saying how you don't watch really TV and movies, but how shocked you were, and how some of these old myths and these old themes keep getting reiterated time and time again. And there must be people listening, I know this, who are feeling exactly like you do, who I do, but we don't know where to start. And I would just say, you just start with every opportunity you have. Right? You put yourself in your conviction, you know what you believe in. And we don't just say, oh, it's easier to go along than to resist. There's a lot of ways to be part of the movement for change, right? And there's a big debate in thought and linguistics about psychology, about, well, do our words influence our thoughts, or do our thoughts influence our words? And this is what you were saying, the as above, so below. And I think it's so important for people to catch yourselves. Take responsibility for what you're saying. It's all going into a collective. Every time that we start to support the new myth, the new feminine, work with, and if you don't work, the people out there, if you don't work with some of those asteroids and feminine planets that Harmony was talking about, what a great opportunity to go exploring. You know, just start with the asteroid goddesses. Like, where do they fall in your chart? What do they activate? How do they maybe balance out or influence or expand some of the things that you think you know about your chart? I would just say that's another way that may not be embodying per se, but it's inching in the direction, just your word, to evolve, to unfold, and to continue to expand. And this was such a beautiful, I mean, it was kind of an argument for it, but it was really just an invitation, and I'm so grateful. Thank you so much.
I had so much fun.
And just take another minute to remind them the gift is right on your speaker page from which they launched this interview, and you gave us a little, you know, prelude there, but tell us what it is.
Yeah, it is a 2-hour class on anchoring the age of Aquarius. And I talk about the ages, the history and meaning of them. I talk about the age of Aquarius now. I talk about the divine feminine. I talk about Sirius. There's a lot of information. And then at the end, there's a guided meditation that goes with it. And so you'll get immediate access to it. And then you just watch it, on your computer, your device, whatever.
Well, no, that's just even more generosity. And thank you again. I hope everybody really enjoyed this. I invite you, if you're not already following Harmony, check out her website. Get to know her on social media. It's not her most visible presence, but it is a way to connect with her. The links are all right on her speaker page. Definitely download that link and make some time to enjoy it. So thank you again. I know you got to run. Thank you, everybody. We really appreciate you. And be sure to tune in to the rest of the interviews on the Modern Astrology Summit. Bye for now.